After my divorce, it felt as though the vivid colors of my world had faded, leaving behind a dull and repetitive existence. Each day blended into the next, a monotonous cycle spent in the company of my own solitude. Over time, I had grown accustomed to it, silent, unobtrusive, filling every moment of my life. Yet deep inside, I knew something was missing. I needed a spark, something that would make me truly feel alive again. One evening, my son, Henry, appeared at my apartment doorway, an unusual excitement lighting up his face. "Mom, you have to come," he insisted, his voice filled with enthusiasm. "There's a private literary gathering at our bookstore tonight, an event for insiders. You've always loved these things, and honestly, it would do you good to get out for a change." I was tempted to refuse, to claim exhaustion or the simple preference to be alone, but there was something in Henry's expression, something rare. He had never invited me anywhere before, not once in his 20 years. This moment was out of character for him, and that made it impossible to decline. He smiled, and before I could think twice, I heard myself say, "All right, Henry, I'll come." I tried to sound confident, though uncertainty lingered in my voice. The moment I stepped into the bookstore, I was struck by the vibrant atmosphere. The place buzzed with life, young people laughing, animated conversations about books filling the air with energy. It felt like I had stepped into a world entirely separate from my own. I couldn't help but feel out of place, as if I had wandered in by mistake. Sensing my discomfort, Henry quickly approached. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, leaning in to be heard over the chatter. "Let me introduce you to Logan. He's a good friend of mine. We work together." I nodded, concealing my unease. At that moment, I had no idea that meeting Logan would change everything. He stood taller than me, his thick dark hair slightly tousled, his deep-set eyes carrying a gaze that seemed to search for something within me. Extending his hand, he smiled, friendly but with a hint of something else, something subtly daring. "Elizabeth, nice to meet you," he said, his voice warm and smooth, instantly settling my nerves. "Nice to meet you too, Logan," I replied, shaking his hand. His touch was firm yet gentle, and the warmth of it lingered longer than expected. Conversation with him flowed effortlessly. We spoke about books, art, travel, each topic unfolding naturally. He listened with genuine interest, his eyes shining as if my words truly mattered. His sincerity was evident, his directness refreshing, yet there was something deeper in his gaze, something I couldn't quite define. "You talk about literature as if it's more than just a pastime," he observed with a teasing edge to his tone. "As if books are your way of understanding the world." I smiled, surprised by how accurately he had read me. "They've always been more than just stories," I admitted. "Books help me make sense of myself." Logan studied me closely, his eyes lingering, and for the first time in years, I felt truly seen. When had I last felt this way, like I was interesting to someone? By the time I left the bookstore that night, the cold wind rushed against my face, but I barely noticed it. I felt strangely exhilarated, as if something had stirred awake inside me, something long buried beneath routines and fears. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what had caused this sensation, whether it was the encounter itself or simply Logan's presence, but I already knew this evening would stay with me for a long time. In the following days, I found myself unable to push Logan from my thoughts. My life had always been carefully structured, free of randomness, yet now it felt as though chance had intervened, disrupting the order I had meticulously built. His voice, his words, the way he had looked at me, it all replayed in my mind, uninvited but persistent. I scolded myself for it. A grown woman shouldn't be flustered by a young man, especially not her son's friend. And yet, no matter how much I tried to dismiss it, thoughts of Logan kept returning. That afternoon, in an attempt to clear my head, I decided to take a walk along the riverbank. The air was crisp, the gentle rush of the water soothing, and golden leaves danced in the breeze, mirroring my quiet unrest. Eventually, I stepped into a small cafe I often visited, seeking warmth and a cup of tea. The scent of freshly baked pastries filled the air, wrapping me in a sense of comfort. For a moment, I allowed myself to sink into the familiar atmosphere, until my gaze landed on him. Logan sat in a corner, absorbed in a book, his expression so focused that the world around him seemed to disappear. I hesitated, but before I could turn away, he looked up and spotted me. A genuine smile spread across his face, lighting it up as if my presence truly pleased him. "Elizabeth!" He waved me over, inviting me to join him. For a brief second, I wavered, battling the impulse to walk away. But then, pushing aside my own hesitation, I found myself approaching his table. "What an unexpected coincidence," I remarked, striving for a tone of casual ease, though something inside me trembled. "I suppose we're both in search of a quiet place to think," he replied with a smirk, closing his book. "How's your day going?" "Unusual," I admitted, barely suppressing a smile. "I didn't expect to run into someone I know." Our conversation unfolded effortlessly, flowing into deeper, more personal territory. Logan spoke about his love for literature, how it had shaped him, how he had once lost faith in people only to rediscover it through stories. I shared my own experiences, laughing at youthful misadventures I hadn't thought about in years. And just like that, I felt something shift, as if, for the first time in a long while, I was once again the girl who dared to dream. Then, without warning, Logan reached into his bag and pulled out a small, worn poetry collection, placing it in front of me. "I found this in a secondhand bookstore recently," he explained, "and I thought you might like it." Curious, I flipped it open and noticed a bookmark marking one specific page. My breath caught as my eyes landed on the poem. It was one I had memorized in my youth, every line still etched in my memory. "Read it," Logan encouraged, his voice both insistent and gentle. At first I hesitated, embarrassed by the idea, but then, under the weight of his expectant gaze, I gave in. Slowly I began to read, and as the familiar words left my lips, they carried a new depth, a meaning I had never fully understood until now. As I finished reading, my voice trembled slightly, a quiet excitement lingering in the air between us. Logan leaned in, his voice barely a whisper above the hum of the cafe. "Your words," he murmured, "they sound like music." I lifted my gaze, meeting his eyes, and something in them made me freeze. The world around us seemed to blur, fading into the background. Slowly, as if time itself had slowed, he moved closer. I felt the warmth of his hand lightly brush against mine, sending a shiver down my spine. And then, in the next moment, his lips met mine, softly, fleetingly, like the delicate flutter of a butterfly's wings. It was barely a kiss, a mere whisper of contact, yet it sent my entire world reeling. The moment was so brief, but within it there was tenderness, warmth, an intimacy that dissolved my fears, if only for an instant. I pulled away abruptly, confusion and embarrassment washing over me. But Logan didn't look away. He studied me with an expression that was both surprised and quietly satisfied. "Logan?" I started, though I had no idea what I meant to say. He only smiled, as if everything that had just happened was the most natural thing in the world. "Sorry if that was too much," he said, though there was no apology in his tone. It just felt right. I had no response. That kiss had awakened something in me, something I thought I had buried long ago. My heart pounded as I stood up, murmuring that I had to leave. Without waiting for his reply, I hurried toward the exit, desperate for fresh air. Outside, the crisp evening breeze hit my face, pulling me back to reality. A storm of emotions churned inside me. Embarrassment, exhilaration, confusion. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me the way Logan did. And even though I knew I should walk away from this, a quiet voice deep inside me whispered that this was only the beginning. Days passed, but I couldn't shake the memory of that barely there kiss. I tried to dismiss it as a moment of weakness, an insignificant slip that meant nothing. But every morning, before I could stop myself, my thoughts drifted back to Logan. His voice, his smile, the intensity of his gaze. I avoided places where I might run into him, convincing myself that distance was the best solution. Yet fate, it seemed, had other plans. One evening, as I was heading home from work, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I hesitated before pulling it out. Logan. I debated whether to ignore the call, but before I could decide, my fingers had already answered. Elizabeth. Hi. His voice was soft, calm, carefully measured. I know you might be avoiding me, and I understand why, but there's something I'd really like to show you. An event on the rooftop of an old building. I think you'll love it. Just give me a chance. A battle raged inside me, logic against desire. The rational part of me knew I should say no, should put an end to this before it spiraled further. But Logan's voice, filled with quiet confidence and unmistakable warmth, unraveled my defenses. All right, I whispered, barely believing my own words. I'll come. By the time I arrived, the sun was setting, casting the sky in hues of deep gold and fiery crimson. The stairs leading up to the rooftop were old, creaking beneath my every step. Still, I kept moving forward, drawn by curiosity and something more. When I reached the top, I saw him. Logan stood near the parapet, gazing out over the city. The wind ruffled his dark hair, and in the fading light, his eyes shimmered with something unreadable. "Thank you for coming," he said as he turned to me. His voice carried a sincerity so genuine that I couldn't help but smile. We stepped closer to the edge, where the city stretched out beneath us in a dazzling sea of lights. As we stood there, Logan began to speak, not just about books or art, but about himself. He told me about his childhood, how he had lost his parents in an accident when he was just a boy, how he had been shuffled through foster homes, learning to survive in a world that offered him no kindness. I listened in silence, my chest tightening. Here was a man who had lived through more hardship than most people ever would. Sometimes, he admitted softly, I feel like I don't belong anywhere, like I'm just watching life happen, searching for my place among strangers. His words struck something deep within me. I wanted to say something, to offer comfort. Instead, I reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. He turned toward me, and in his eyes I saw a reflection of my own uncertainty. We were so close now, close enough that I could feel his breath against my skin. My heart pounded as he slowly leaned in, and then he kissed me. This time, it was different. There was no hesitation, no fleeting touch. It was deep, unrestrained, filled with emotions neither of us had spoken aloud. His hands traced over my shoulders, pulling me closer, and all the fears, all the doubts melted away. For that moment, nothing else existed, not the world below, not the rules I had always followed. Just us, lost in the cool night air, surrounded by the scent of spring. When the kiss finally ended, my knees felt weak beneath me. Logan gazed at me, his expression a mixture of tenderness and quiet triumph. I started, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he murmured, smiling. I just wanted to be near you. But reality came crashing down all at once. A cold panic spread through me as I took a shaky step back. I was a mother. I was older than him by so many years, and he was my son's friend. This was madness. This is wrong, I said, trying to steady my voice, though every fiber of my being screamed otherwise. We shouldn't continue this. He didn't answer immediately. For a moment, a flicker of disappointment crossed his face, but he didn't try to stop me. Instead, he nodded slowly. If that's what you think, he said, his voice quiet, unreadable. I understand. I turned away, forcing myself to move, to descend the stairs before I lost the resolve to leave. My emotions twisted inside me, a tangled mess of desire and guilt. That kiss had been beautiful, intoxicating, but I had crossed a line I never should have crossed, and yet, as I stepped out onto the street, one thought remained. This wasn't the end. I could try to run from it, pretend it had never happened. But deep down, I already knew the truth. This pull between us, it wasn't something I could resist for long. Several days passed, but Logan remained in my thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I relived that night. The way he had looked at me, the way his lips had felt against mine. It was as if I were standing at the edge of a cliff. My heart urged me to leap, but my mind begged me to step back. I knew what I had to do. I had to end this before it went too far. I couldn't allow myself to fall for a man so much younger than me, someone even younger than Henry. It would be selfish, reckless, unfair to my son. And yet Logan didn't fade away. He kept reaching out, sending me short messages, nothing grand, nothing dramatic, just simple words, asking how I was, sharing thoughts, telling me about the books he was reading. At first, I ignored them, but eventually I responded. And then, slowly, he started appearing. During my morning runs, at the cafe I visited every Saturday, it was as if fate, or something else, refused to let me forget. I tried to tell myself it was all just a coincidence, that Logan's sudden appearances in my usual places were nothing more than chance. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, a quiet unease began to settle in, growing heavier with each passing day. One evening, as I arrived home, I found Henry waiting for me in the kitchen. His expression was serious, his fingers absently spinning a coffee cup between his hands. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked without looking up. A sense of dread crept over me. I forced a calm tone. "Of course, Henry. What's wrong?" His gaze flicked up, sharp with irritation. "You've been acting strange lately. Always disappearing, barely talking to me. Is this about Logan?" I froze. My heart pounded so loudly I feared he could hear it. "Logan?" I repeated, striving for a casual tone. "We've just been talking a little. He's your friend, Henry. Why are you so worried?" Henry's expression darkened. His voice, firm and almost accusatory, sent a chill through me. "I overheard him talking to someone. He's not who he pretends to be, Mom. He has problems, serious ones, and I don't want you getting caught up in his mess." A cold fear tightened in my chest. "What kind of problems?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Debts," Henry answered bluntly. "Big ones. He's already tried borrowing money from friends, and now he knows you're well off." His jaw clenched. "I'm just afraid he's using you." His words hit me like a slap. Could Logan really be that kind of person? Had everything he said, every touch, every glance, been a carefully crafted lie? "Henry, I understand you're worried," I said, trying to convince both him and myself. "But I don't believe Logan would do that. He's always been honest with me." "You don't know him at all," Henry said quietly, his voice heavy with conviction. "Just be careful, Mom." The anxiety inside me swelled. I wanted to believe Logan, but Henry's warning refused to leave my mind. The next day, an anonymous letter arrived. There was no name, no return address, only a simple message. "Be careful with Logan. He's not who he claims to be." A chill ran through me. This was no longer just Henry's suspicion. Someone else was warning me too. But who? And why? I couldn't live in this state of doubt any longer. That evening, I made a decision. I had to confront Logan directly. I sent him a message asking to meet at our usual cafe. His reply came almost instantly. "Of course, Elizabeth, I'll be there." When I arrived, he was already waiting. He stood as I approached, his face lighting up with a warm, genuine smile. But I couldn't bring myself to return it. I sat down across from him, my heart heavy. "Logan, I need the truth. You owe me that much." His expression shifted, his body tensing. "What do you mean?" His voice was cautious. "Your debts, your past, whether you're using me." The words tasted bitter in my mouth. For a brief moment he looked stunned, as if I had hit him with something unexpected. Then slowly he exhaled. "I do have problems," he admitted, his voice quiet. "But I have never lied to you. Everything I've said, everything I feel for you, is real. I just wanted you to be happy, to remind you that life could be something more." I studied him, searching for deception in his eyes. But all I saw was sincerity. And yet, something inside me still resisted, still held back. That night, I lay awake, replaying the conversation over and over. Logan's words had sounded true, but so had Henry's warning. And then there was the letter. Who was I supposed to believe? The answer came sooner than I expected. The following morning, another anonymous letter arrived, but this time it wasn't just words, it was photographs. Logan speaking with a stranger as an envelope changed hands. Logan withdrawing money from an ATM. Logan seated in an upscale restaurant with an elegantly dressed woman. Each image chipped away at the fragile trust I had clung to. Had I been so blind? I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to see for myself who Logan really was. I knew where he lived, but I had never been to his home. That was about to change. By the time I reached his apartment, my pulse was racing. I knocked firmly on the door, and almost instantly I heard footsteps on the other side. When Logan opened the door, surprise flickered across his face, quickly followed by something else, concern. "Elizabeth?" His voice was unsteady. "What are you doing here?" I took a deep breath, willing myself to stay composed. "I need to talk to you, here, now. No more pretending, no more half-truths." He hesitated for only a second before stepping aside. "Come in." His apartment was small, modest, even a little run down. Nothing like the life I had seen in those photographs. The air carried the faint scent of coffee and old books, and stacks of papers were scattered across the table. He closed the door behind me and ran a hand through his hair. "Listen, I understand why you're here." His voice was low. "But you have to trust me. I'm not who you think I am." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Trust you?" I pulled the envelope from my bag and placed it on the table between us. "Then explain these." Logan's expression darkened as he carefully picked up the photographs. His fingers tightened around the edges, his jaw clenching. "Who sent you these?" he murmured, his voice tense. "You tell me," I shot back. "Who are these people? Why didn't you tell me about them?" He let out a slow breath, staring down at the pictures before finally speaking. "They're old acquaintances. People I should have cut ties with long ago." His voice was measured, careful. "I did have financial problems, Elizabeth. I won't deny that. But I never once used you." He looked up at me, his gaze burning with intensity. "These people, they're from my past. I've been trying to escape them, but they won't let me." Something inside me wavered. His words rang with truth, but then so had all the lies I had believed before. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice almost desperate. "Why keep it from me?" Logan sighed, stepping closer. "Because I didn't want to drag you into it. You're different, Elizabeth. You're light, you're warmth. I didn't want my past to touch you." I wanted to believe him. But as I stood there, looking at him, torn between trust and doubt, I realized something terrifying. No matter what I chose to believe, I was already too deep in this. I opened my mouth, searching for the right words, but before I could speak, the apartment door suddenly swung open. Henry stormed in, his face flushed with agitation, his breath heavy as if he had run all the way here. "What's going on?" His voice was sharp, almost accusatory. His eyes flicked between Logan and me, dark with suspicion. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Shock coursed through me. "Henry, were you following me?" His jaw tightened. "I was trying to protect you," he shot back, his voice rising with frustration. "I knew you'd meet him again." "Mom, he's lying to you. I heard them talking. About you, about your money." Logan immediately raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Wait, Henry, that's not true. You misunderstood." "I'm done guessing what's true and what's a lie," I cut in, my voice unsteady, my eyes burning with unshed tears. I turned to Logan, my heart pounding. "You told me you had feelings for me, that you wanted to be with me, but now I don't know what to believe." Logan stepped forward, his hand reaching for my shoulder, but I instinctively moved back. A flicker of pain crossed his face. "Elizabeth, please!" he pleaded, his voice rough with desperation. "Don't walk away! Give me a chance to explain." But something inside me had already begun to close off. The doubts, the warnings, the weight of mistrust, they had all built up until I could no longer ignore them. "I can't," I whispered, my throat tight. "I need time to think, to figure things out." I turned toward the door, feeling Henry beside me, his presence solid, protective. Logan didn't try to stop me. He just stood there, watching, his expression a mix of heartbreak and helplessness. As I stepped out of the apartment and into the cold night, my heart felt as if it were being torn in two. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep living in this storm of uncertainty. I had to put an end to it. But where did that leave me?